Hello, you are listening to Decipher This, a podcast about music and technology from Ensemble Decipher. My name is Eric Lemmon.
And I'm Rob Cosgrove.
And we're very excited to be speaking with Dr. Jose Tomás Henriques today. Tomás is a composer, inventor, educator, and entrepreneur, currently professor of music at Buffalo State College, where he teaches electronic music, music theory, music composition, and is the director of the program in digital music production. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Tomás.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I think just to start and to give some context for all the projects that you have done over the years, just if you could give us a little background about how you got started in music and technology.
Okay, so my start in technology, I can trace it back to when I was doing my master's and PhD, which I did at University at Buffalo back in the early 1990s. Prior to coming to Buffalo, I had been in Paris, in France, studying at GRM, at the Groupe de Recherche Musicale. So we were doing all types of experimentation using the old techniques, tape techniques, and had the opportunity to interact with the great masters of music concrete. So it was a very different type of scene. And but it was great, that experience in terms of dealing with electronic music, and having that craftsmanship component where you actually had to deal with tape and cut tape and reassemble. So that type of craft was very interesting in terms of dealing with electronic sound. So I then came to the States to do a master's and PhD at UB, at University of Buffalo. And back then, the music department was in full force using the next IRCAM workstations, with the first original versions of Macs. So it was very exciting to be in Buffalo at the time. So that's my start in music technology. But parallel to my activities as a composer. And as a researcher that does quite a bit of work in technology, music technology, I have always had a parallel path, so to speak, with acoustic and instrumental music, and that has to do really with my background as a slide trombone player, as a euphonium player, and someone who went through the music conservatory for many years.
So I think this is really interesting, actually, and this is one of the questions that we had wanted to really ask you. And I know that musicologists would be ready to point out that instruments like the violin or the marimba were once new interfaces for musical expression themselves and are in themselves a musical technology. So you write for these more traditional instruments. Do you see a difference in composing for some of these older instruments and the ones that you develop yourselves, or are they part and parcel to one another? Is it all part of like one compositional practice?
Well, to be honest with you, you don't find many musicologists that think that a marimba or a violin will be, a new interface at the time. So, and that is because we are still living at a time where there is still some type of pushback from colleagues that come from a world of instrumental music that are not 100% comfortable, dealing with electronic music. But if that was the case, which sometimes that does happen, there's many. I think there's quite a few differences in terms of composing for normal acoustic instruments versus new electronic instruments, especially if those new electronic instruments are truly not mainstream. I mean, one thing is if you're writing something for a Moog synthesizer or for an electric guitar, I mean, those instruments have been around for quite a while, and it's easy to let musicians know what you want to get out of those instruments. But if you are writing for newer electronic instruments that, sometimes instruments that only a few people have access to, such as the Haken fingerboard and or even the Rolly keyboard, so that's really poses a whole new series of questions in terms of how you're going to write for the instrument, how you're going to convey what needs to be done, and you do have to interact closely and talk closely with the performers. I mean, we are still at a time that we lack some type of common language, and when it comes to the performance of electronic music, not only in terms of notation, which has been a problem that has plagued electronic music since its inception, in the early 1950s. We still are very much dealing with the problem: how can we notate what we are doing, and that places us at a place of disadvantage in terms of how can we make sure that the music that we are writing is going to be properly recreated 50 years from now. I know I know quite a few composers that wrote quite a bit of electronic music, and then they retire and they stop updating their patches and stuff like that. And that creates a huge problem in terms of how to make the all of the time that they have spent creating music and devoting their creativity to electronic music, how to make those pieces to still stay current beyond just being digitized. So it's easy to to digitize and try to change formats as we go along, but actually to make sure that all the details that are incredibly important to set up the instruments and to get the sound out of the instruments and the way that the composer imagines it, it's going to be, it's always a challenge. So the question that you ask me, it's very difficult to answer, because I think it's very dynamic. It's always, we are always learning new ways to transmit what we are trying to do. And I think very often I find myself, giving not only indications on paper but also recordings for musicians to know what what type of sound they should achieve when they are trying to put together a composition that I have written. Mm-hmm. So, but it's definitely a challenge.
You've created a variety of highly interactive electronic musical instruments and gaming controllers, and in 2010 you won the Guthman Musical Instrument Competition, which is this kind of prestigious.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now it's a huge thing now, where people all over the world make a variety of different types of instruments, whether they're electronic or otherwise. So the instrument you built for the Guthman competition, the double slide controller, is an electronic wind instrument. I think that's
yes.
Like the easiest way to describe it, commonly known as the iwi. That resembles a trombone with two sliders and is decked out with all sorts of different controllers like joysticks and various buttons to manipulate parameters of the sound as you play it. So we can link to a video of a demo of this in the episode summary if people want to see it. But could you describe a little bit about the instrument's controls?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so as a former performer on the acoustic slide trombone, I was always interested in trying to create a version of the instrument that will be an electronic instrument. We had, and we still have nowadays, some wind controllers made by Akai and made by Roland that going all the way back to the 1980s, that simulate an electric trumpet, the Akai EVI or the Akai Iwi that simulates a saxophone using the Boehm system. But there was nothing out in the market that was available that would use the playing technique of the slide trombone, and so I decided to give it a shot. And instead of just using one slide, I decided to actually utilize two slides. And the reason was very simple. When you play an acoustic slide trombone, your left hand basically just sits holding the instrument. And which I thought to be really, kind of wasteful to have all of that real estate, just doing that. Your hand is an incredibly, powerful tool when it comes to doing things. So the instrument was built with using two slides and using two controllers that attach to the slides. And the controllers are packed with sensors. Each controller has 13 buttons. On-off buttons, joystick, accelerometer, gyroscope, a pressure sensor, and so all of that stuff was used, and they are incredibly malleable. They move in 3D space, and I do remember when I went to the Guthman competition that one of the judges back then in 2010 was Todd McCover from the MIT Media Lab, and I did notice that he was very interested in looking at my instrument. He took many pictures, so that kind of encouraged me, and which was, and then when I had the opportunity to actually perform on the instrument, I think I had a bit of an advantage because having a musical background gave me some type of, I was at ease improvising. So when it came to actually play something, I was able to do it without much effort. And many of the a lot of people that come to the Guthman competition, many are engineers or are people that don't really have don't have a mature musical background. So I had a bit of an advantage when it came to that. But yeah, and I do remember playing. I mean, we probably saw a video on YouTube that I am playing, actually something that is pretty melodic, that utilizes pitches. And the reason I did that was on purpose, in the sense that I wanted to show that the instrument could not only play complex sonic materials by using the hands and all of that 3D motion, by applying that motion to doing real-time filtering and so on and so on and so forth, but also that the instrument could actually be used to play, a Korsakov concerto or some type of, something that will be incredibly pitch based.
Right.
When I create electronic instruments, I do tend to create stuff that can be used in a wide range of approach, from including using a lot of musical technique, in terms of that you could be, someone that practices many hours every day, and you could be someone that can actually develop the technique that would allow you to really play with a great degree of technical prowess. So yeah, so that's basically the story behind the double slide controller. It is a wind controller because you do have a sensor that you blow through. The instrument also, I think, was the very first one that utilizes a vibration sensor on the mouthpiece, and so basically allowing a conductor to actually send a signal directly to the musician via vibration on the mouthpiece. So actually, the mouthpiece not only has the vibration sensor, has also a pressure sensor, and it detects variations in the blow that the instrument, that the player is doing. So a lot of stuff going on in that instrument. I did contact the Yamaha Corporation and the Akai Corporation about the instrument to see if they were interested in going for a commercial version of the instrument, and I was flabbergasted when I heard their reaction, which really made me think a lot about a lot of things about the world of commercial electronic instruments. They literally told me that for them to even consider doing a commercial version of the instrument, that I would have to dumb down the instrument considerably.
Right.
They told me that you have just like too much going. And it is true that these big corporations such as Akai and Roland, they have out in the market instruments that are incredibly simple. I mean, the Akai Iwi or the Roland Aerophone, they don't even use accelerometers. Some stuff that you literally cost you $2 to put in.
Yeah.
So they're not using, when you play a wind instrument, your body moves. I mean, you are always doing stuff, physically in space, these little nuances that are so important for the performance. And all of that motion in space is totally being ignored by these companies that make these instruments. So, so it was an eye-opener in terms of, what it takes to put out an instrument out there in the market. And I totally understand why now, when you ask someone, what electronic music instruments do you know that are available? And people will say to you, electric guitar and electric keyboard. They don't really know anything else.
Yeah.
Even though there have been many dozens or even hundreds of instruments that have been created over the last 3 or 4 decades. So it's very interesting that electronic instruments are trying to come into the market and trying to make a mark and trying to stay relevant and to captivate people's imagination. But I totally see that how difficult it is.
you raise an interesting point that I think kind of overlaps with something you were mentioning earlier with, you were talking about how electronic composers, they'll notate things out, they'll retire and then they'll stop, updating their max patch, and the software that they use will go out of date, and then everything is obsolete. And they're not spending the time to keep updating it. And nobody's, because of the nature of, I think, just concert music in general and music in general, right? Is that, music lives from being performed over and over again, especially in the concert art music tradition, right? Is that we have some war horses that are played a lot. And who knows, if Prokofiev had not written for the saxophone, right? Classical sax might not be a thing. Who knows?
Yeah.
But so like these new technologies need some sort of social constituency to like bring them forward. And maybe it's a similar thing with, electronic instruments. And I don't know, I see like Sun Ra playing in Iwi all the time, right? And so it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I think, and going back to something I said before, I mean, I think that we need to come up with some type of way to be able to easily, so to speak, to be able to code the complexities of the compositions that we create as electronic music compositions, so that we can transmit that without any type of pain, moving forward in time.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that the first experiments that were done in terms of notating music, electronic music, we can trace that back to Stockhausen when he wrote the study number 2, and that which is a piece that lasts less than 5 minutes, but if you look at the score, it's like 200 pages of graphs. It's totally crazy. Nobody will ever go try to recreate. Well, people have done that, but it's try to recreate that composition based on 200 pages or more of these complex graphs and numbers and so on and so forth. So maybe going forward with the AI, we can somehow try to maybe we can have software that can in real time code all the complexities of the sounds that new instruments make, and be able to quickly bring that back in a fast and accurate way as we go forward. That's the only way I see for electronic music to really survive, for the things that we do to survive in time. I mean, we are now, people are writing for violins. Violins have been around for hundreds of years, and they will be around for many more, for sure. It's an instrument that has some constraints in terms of what it can do, but there is some beauty in having constraints, because we know how to write for it and how it's going to respond, and we can easily, so to speak, keep writing for the instrument. And it's not the same for electronic instruments. But it's a challenge, and I believe that there's a lot of people out there that are very passionate about electronic music and about how to use new instruments, and to try to explore creatively what these new instruments can offer. So I'm hopeful that things are going to still be relevant in the future.
Yeah. One thing that is interesting to me is kind of the continuing work that has to go into like an electronic music project or creating an instrument or something like that. So often when we're making these projects, we have iterations, we have prototypes and sort of things. And so there's a certain point, if you're approaching a deadline or something like that you say, okay, well, this is the final prototype. This is when I'm going to stop or something like that. But do you have like a point in your process where you say, okay, I've arrived at the instrument, like this is like complete or something like that? Or do you see it more as this kind of continuing process?
That's a very good question. I mean, when it comes to creating a new instrument, there is definitely the hardware component, which is kind of easy to be done with, and then when you start exploring the software, which is equally as relevant to showcase what the instrument can do, I find myself doing something that is pretty dangerous, which is to keep writing more and more and more because the hardware allows you to do that. The hardware allows you to accept software that is going to to make the instrument do new things. I remember for my double slide controller, I wrote a ton of software, and then I kept writing software that would allow the instrument to play harmonies in real time, and then to play some type of counterpoint in real time, and then to play to do pitch shifting and in different ways, and then use. I also spent some time creating modules for real time audio processing, to do filtering and to do ring modulation and so forth. So you may find I have found myself just like spending an incredible amount of hours just working on the software, and then I look myself in the mirror and say, my God, I mean, it's probably just not the right approach. I should just stop and say, I'm going to write pieces just for whatever I have now, because otherwise, you just want to create an instrument that is so encompassing in terms of what it can do. And that's the beauty of really of an electronic music instrument that is software dependent. That doesn't really happen with a violin. Of course, I mean, you can make an argument that a composer with different ideas can write different, will write different things, and the sounds that you can make get out of a violin can always change. But you are pretty limited, even with extended techniques and stuff like that. But with a electronic instrument, I mean, really, when it comes to software, there is no limitation. So I mean, there is, but you can do so much. So yeah, I found out that that is actually very, very dangerous. I mean, I can tell you a very interesting story. Recently, I applied to be promoted to full professor, and I had a couple of people writing things about my application process, and I had this composer from McGill. You probably know the name, Marcello Wanderley, who is the head of the program of music technology at McGill. And when he wrote about my work and stuff like that, he actually quantized. Tomás has done X amount of has invented X amount of instruments, has written over 25 pieces of software and stuff like. And then when I actually saw it quantized like that, I mean, I was flabbergasted. I was actually scared. Oh my God, what have I been doing? This is just insanity.
You've been procrastinating from writing music.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, life is short, and I think that I think that one has to kind of find a sweet spot in terms of when am I going to stop, and then I'm going to make all the software I have written and all the instruments that I have written to be more visible within the electronic music scene and so on and so forth. So it was really an eye-opener that writing software and being a composer / researcher doing research in software instrument and in software and hardware can be almost like a drug.
Yeah.
So like you find yourself just like going back and just like coding and doing all of so yeah. So I think that actually where I am right now, I have decided to kind of slow down in terms of trying to come up with new things. I do have many instruments that I still look at them and say, oh my God, my Sonik Spring, I need to finish the software that I have been writing to make it actually play like a concertina, like. I have not done that. You probably saw a video of the Sonik Spring online where I do real-time audio processing with it, which is very cool. And so, but the instrument actually has buttons on the handles that actually allow it to play melodies and harmonies and stuff like that. And I have started to write the software to allow it to play like a normal, so to speak, concertina. So there's always, like I said, going back to what I said before, there's always space to keep back and to keep improving these instruments.
So you already brought it up, but you're working on Sonik Spring, and we saw a video where one of your collaborators was using it as a way to move through 3D rendered space, which obviously has, very interesting applications in augmented and virtual reality. So you already said that you're trying to apply it in a musical sense to kind of represent the concertina. Could you tell us a little more about, when we were doing research, preparing for our discussion today, we saw, there's biometrics that can be added into the controller. And how are you applying that, or are you imagining applying that for musical creativity? You have, haptics, right?
Yes.
Which are responding, right, to, I guess, the controller.
Yeah.
How do you see that playing into the musical experience?
Okay, so let me give you a little bit of a background. So I invented the Sonik Spring back in 2011, and that instrument, which actually uses a 15-inch metal spring, evolved into a smaller instrument, and that smaller instrument evolved into being utilized mainly as an interface for human-computer interaction. And what is very interesting is that people that have been the most receptive about the use of this device are not actually musicians, but are actually people in the medical field. Because I did add so the Sonik Spring and its offshoot, which is called the spring controller, is based on a flexible spring that you can move in 3D space, incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful in terms of how you are able to feel every single nuance of motion in space, and how you get force feedback from manipulating the spring. So I'm working with force feedback with the controller, but also I did add some biometric sensors, namely galvanic skin sensors to test basic levels of stress. There's sensors that do sense how hard you are pressing on the handles, very sensitive, and also a sensor that senses your heart rate. And all of this stuff is incredibly relevant for people working especially in the medical field. When you have there's the paradigm of the video game has totally infiltrated into the medical profession. So there's many medical professionals and companies working in the medical field that use video games and use VR and augmented reality, that are actually very interested in using a controller that applies force feedback plus all of these biometric sensing signals. So when it comes to music, I don't know. I haven't really given a lot of thought about how to use biometrics, the biometric feedback that I'm getting from these, other than collecting that data and sending it to the conductor,
Yeah.
and let the conductor make decisions in terms of what should I do or what can I ask from the musicians, depending on their level of anxiety or their level of commitment to what they are doing musically. I mean, when you think about the video game, that's easier to think about biometric stuff, because you can actually program a video game to respond to how you are feeling, and you can actually code the game so that it takes you, if you are too scared, if you are playing a game that is kind of scary, if you are just like scared off the charts, then the video game can sense that you are, let's not kill this person with a heart attack. Let's open up a new room where you can sit down and have a mojito or whatever. So calm down. and so in terms of music, I do know that there are some researchers out there that have been using biometric sensors for musical purposes. Sensors that respond to the muscle motion, but all of these sensing mechanisms are not as relevant as, musically speaking, right now, in my opinion, as many other things that we can do with these instruments. So yeah, I think it's a new open field to explore. I mean, I keep coming back to the fact that working with pitch and working with time these two dimensions in these two musical parameters keep coming back to me as the most fundamental parameters to work with. And anything that you do, need to go back to to dealing with how we perceive pitch and how we perceive time. Even knowing that we live in this post-Cage era where we have been looking at electronic music more as working with paintings, where we are drawing with sound, and we have tried so desperately to run away and to divorce ourselves from the tyranny of pitch and the tyranny of clock-based rhythm. But one of the things that kind of fascinates me is, to study and to trying to understand a bit better, what are our limitations, in our minds, and what are the human mind's limitations. So limitation in a good sense, how can we keep creating music that is going to be meaningful now and meaningful 200 years from now? And what kind of musical parameters do we need to be focusing on so that humans in the future will still enjoy the works that we are doing right now, so that the stuff that we are doing right now is just not merely experimental for a couple of people just to enjoy at one concert or two concerts. So I find that fascinating myself. These dichotomy, so to speak, these two aspects of music, pitch-based music and noise-based music, or complex. And it all ties also to what we have spoken already before, which is the difficulty that we have in notating what we are doing. So the complexity that, of the stuff that we are doing kind of, sometimes you synthesize a sound that is so beautiful that you say, my God, I can write a piece just by modifying, small amounts of this sound and moving it through time and making it organic and so on and so forth. So basically, we can make a piece just based on how beautiful a given sound can be. That would be totally impossible to do with the cello or to do with the clarinet. I mean, with those instruments, even though what they make is beautiful, you need to create some type of time structure and pitch structure so that we can create something that is going to be relevant musically. So it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge.
Certainly.
So over the last few years, you've been working at Buff State, as we mentioned before, but you're creating this system, a 52.1 surround sound system. So that's 53 speakers for anyone that's uninitiated, in Rockwell's Ciminelli Hall at SUNY Buffalo State. And actually, Ensemble Decipher is going to be the first ensemble to kind of activate the system to sound to this. So it's very exciting. And people are kind of familiar with spatialization maybe in the stereo fields, if they're listening to something on Spotify or if they're listening to an MP3 just on their headphones. But then it kind of kind of explodes once you get to ambisonics and these larger surround sound systems. So we're wondering kind of if you could unpack for our listeners the difference between like this these ways of spatializing in the stereo field, and then like kind of where this exists in that spectrum, and all those things.
Okay, so very good. So let me give you also a little bit of a background how the system came to be. Back in 2011, Buffalo State built a new concert hall. It's a small concert hall, 200 seat, and the concert hall had really bad acoustics. Very, very dry. Was not really suitable for music performance. So we, the college hired Yamaha Japan to install a virtual acoustic system, which basically it's a group of speakers, and the goal and the function of these speakers is basically to make the room more friendly in terms of, the room becomes more intimate, becomes definitely way better for music performance. And so when they installed all of those speakers in the hall, I did notice that the speakers could be used in a different way if the hardware could have been changed to be all integrated. So one of the things that is incredibly interesting about the space is that there's a group, actually a subgroup of 32 speakers that are geometrically placed in space. They are exactly the same distance in relationship to one another. So they create some type of matrix that would allow sound to be transmitted in a very smooth way. So anyway, I was very lucky to have at the time a dean that was very bold, that actually was able to make money available for Yamaha to do a hardware transformation, and that hardware transformation actually meant to install a digital audio network, a Dante digital audio network that was able to connect all the speakers. So that was just like the hardware infrastructure. And since 2013, I have been working on and off to actually write the code that allows you to effectively use the room. So basically, to answer your question, going from stereo, from 2 channels to going through 5, to surround 5.1 is already quite a bit of a change. But then going from 5.1 to go to a room where literally sound can be coming out of 53 different speakers, it's a whole different experience. I have been writing the code so that sound can be either panned in a simple way where sounds can float from left to right, up and down the hall and stuff like that in a smooth way. But one of the things that I have devoted quite a bit of time is actually to use the speakers to explore what we call in spatial audio as point source sound location. So where sounds can jump from one place to another, and so on and so forth. I have actually been writing writing software for sound specialization all the way back to 1995, 1996, when I was doing my PhD at the University of Buffalo. And so this issue of sound in space has intrigued me. I can tell you that it is a bit frustrating because, again, because of the way that we, the human mind perceives sounds. I mean, our mind tends to put an incredible amount of relevance in the location itself of the sound. Where's the sound? That's, our mind has been engineered for thousands of years to be able to quickly pinpoint the location of a sound, because it could literally save our lives. Where's the big tiger coming to get me? So you need to be exactly.
Yep.
We need to know. So what I have found to be difficult to surpass is to create the sound specialization patterns that allow the human mind that allow the listener to transcend the mere localization of the sound, but to actually understand the creation of patterns in time that have to do with different locations of the sound in space. that has been my goal, has been my challenge, and so I hope that I can showcase some interesting solutions, and I'm incredibly happy and looking forward to working with you. You guys will be in fact the first ensemble to explore the space in that way, and I hope that something musically interesting can come back out of this experience. Yamaha itself is actually interested in the project. Yamaha engineers have come to see the work I have been doing with the system, and now the Yamaha Corporation now is actually installing new virtual acoustic system where from the get-go they are actually wiring up all the speakers that they put in space. So they see the validity of having the speakers networked, and for people to use these systems in a more creative way. So that was that has been good to see that they are doing that. I mean, this is not 100% new. You probably have heard about the Dolby Atmos system that is installed in some cinemas. But the fact that what we have in Ciminelli is way more experimental, and it's geared towards the creation of electronic music works that explore some strange stuff. People are not really going to see a Marvel movie to see this crazy sound specialization stuff. I think the Atmos system basically provides an additional layer of specialization, because you have arrays of speakers above your head that allow you to hear sounds coming from back and forth in a smooth way.
Right.
So you can do that in Ciminelli, but you can do way more than that. For instance, at Ciminelli, every single speaker or channel has its own set of audio processing effects. So for each channel, so you can do a lot of very complex stuff and very interesting things. But again, going back to what I said before, that how can you effectively use space as a musical parameter that is powerful? That is a challenge. I mean, if you look at the evolution of music, we can actually see and witness the relevance of the different musical parameters by looking at when they were notated. I mean, pitch start being notated, when more than 1,000 years ago, that composers start, or people working with music start notating, pitches, and then came notation of time, and not until the 20th century, with Stockhausen, do we see the notation of space. I mean, sure, you can say that back in the 1700s, or late 1600s, you had people doing experiments with sound in Venice at the St. Mark Cathedral, the Gabrielli brothers and stuff like that. But that was more like it was cool to have the sound of a choir to go from the front of the cathedral to go to the back and stuff like that. But it is with Stockhausen that we see the first efforts to treat space as a musical parameter as valid as pitch. So it's very late that it becomes main, that it tries to become mainstream, and not very successfully, because very few people are working with sound in space. And I think that I truly believe that's because we have to go beyond this barrier, so to speak, which is that our mind totally focus on location, and then to go beyond that, to actually for our mind to understand patterns, and patterns that evolve and that morph into one another, just the same way that we deal with pitch, where we have patterns of pitches that are modified and so on and so forth. That is really what I find to be intriguing, and not very easy to succeed at transmitting something musically via sound in space.
So trajectories of musical modernity aside, how are you trying to address it? And maybe I should not be asking this question because it'll be a big spoiler alert for our concert later this year. But maybe you can give us a little teaser of what you're thinking. How are you structuring space, or how are you integrating the structure of space into the structure of the work in this new system. Do you have any ideas that you've been playing around with that you're really interested in?
Sure. Yeah, I can give you a little bit of So, I have a group of musical materials that that are intertwined, and different layers of rhythmic and melodic activity that will be presented as in mono, basically condensed, and which will survive musically totally fine by itself, and then I can explode it and separate the layers that I have into different locations in space. So basically you morph from having some type of musical activity that is actually in one single spatial location, and surviving. Again, I'm using the word survive, but what I mean is that will be meaningful musically by itself, and then you can basically spread it. You can separate those different components and showcase them by having them actually move in different points in space. So that's one of the things that I'll be exploring, that I'll be asking you to help me showcase.
Very cool.
Yes.
Excited about that.
So yeah, I mean, and other things. I actually have done some crazy experiments using a Baroque fugue, where you have the different voices of a 4 or 5 part fugue, where you show it in just like one or two speakers, and then you explode it into different, and you actually create patterns in space. So you have like the voice number 1 is going to use a series of speakers, and then is going to go from one speaker to the other. The software that I actually wrote is able to be used with DAWs, with Logic or Pro Tools. You actually can write MIDI information at the note level, and you can perform it and assign it to any speaker in the system. So you can create very complex, very fast things. And I was very pleased to see that Logic and Max integrate very well. So I'm doing stuff with Logic and sending it to Max in real time, and Max is sending all the sounds to all the speakers. When I first heard that, I was, wow, it works. So it was great as an experiment. So yeah,
it's a little bit like that Bach Webern setting.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yes,
but in an orchestra rather than all around the audience. It'll be really exciting to hear.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Decipher This. Special thanks to Tomás for joining us today. Your hosts are me, Rob Cosgrove, and Eric Lemmon. And the episode was edited and produced by Joey Bohikin.